My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We have an interesting program tonight. Preston Dennett. Preston Dennett's book on ET healings was the first book to ever examine accounts of physiological improvement resulting from UFO encounters. While researching for his book, Preston studied 110 cases of people who were cured of illnesses and diseases by UFOs, ranging from the common cold to cancer. The cases in question were investigated and verified by UFO investigators, doctors, and other officials. In his presentation tonight, Preston is going to give us an overview of his dramatic and interesting ET healing cases. Preston Dennett began his investigative work on UFOs and the paranormal in 1986, after discovering that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's a field investigator for the MUFON network. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and an out-of-body explorer, and author of 10 books. And he's got them all out there, so I'd encourage you to go see him at the end of this. Articles he has written have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlantis Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus Paranormal Magazine, and UFO Magazine. His writing has been translated into several languages, including German, Portuguese, Chinese, and Icelandic. He's appeared on numerous radio and television programs, and his research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and hopefully soon in Studio Patch. He's taught classes on various paranormal subjects and lectures across the United States, and he currently resides in Canoga Park. Would you please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Preston Dennett.
So I'm just going to get right to it because I've got a lot I want to say. Thank you, Steve, for that glowing introduction. Yeah, I started out actually very skeptical of UFOs. It was in 1986. I heard about a sighting in Alaska by a Japanese airliner. You may remember it, Captain Taroshi. He sighted a large walnut-shaped UFO over the Arctic area, or the ice cap in Alaska. And he actually saw 2 UFOs, and it did appear on his onboard radar, and it was confirmed by the FAA on their ground radar, though they later denied it and called it a split image. And none of this was in the news when I heard it. It was all very tongue-in-cheek, and the newscasters joked nervously about it, and I didn't believe it for a second. I thought this guy is hoaxing, he's hallucinating, he's misperceiving. UFOs are not real, and I was sure because they would have been taken more seriously in the news, they would have been taught in school. This is what my thinking was. So I was really skeptical and ready to tell anyone who thought they saw a UFO that they were basically full of crap. And so I was really rude about it, I'm afraid. And so this kind of intrigued me, though, and I made the mistake of asking my family and friends what they thought of this ridiculous pilot. And one by one, they came forward with these amazing stories. My brother said he chased a UFO across the valley here on Reseda Boulevard, actually, with his 2 friends. And my sister-in-law said she and her 2 friends saw a UFO hovering over Van Nuys Air Force Base. And later she saw what appears to be your typical gray-type extraterrestrial. And this was at 11 o'clock at night in the 70s in front of Stagg Street Elementary School, of all places. So, yeah, this hit home for me. I found 2 co-workers who had had really profound encounters, and one had a missing time encounter on the way home from the library in Koreatown, and I had 2 friends who had missing time encounters. So this is what started it for me. I started interviewing these people. I joined every UFO group I could find. I joined MUFON right away. That was back when there was about 7 members in MUFON LA, and we met in a bank. So yeah, I became pretty much obsessed with the subject, and wrote this article for the local newspaper, and which was how it really all began for me. Since then I did a lot of radio. I started writing books. I've written 8 UFO books so far, with 2 more upcoming, and several on other paranormal subjects. So yeah, this subject, once it grabs you, it kind of doesn't let go. Now, let's see if this works. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to do a little shameless self-promotion here of some of my UFO books. This was actually the first one I wrote, and it covers a number of local cases, mostly here in the Valley and throughout California, and some out of state. This is UFOs over Topanga Canyon, which covers a wave of sightings actually from 1992 to 1994 and other cases. It's a very active area, and I'm going to call it probably one of the most active areas locally here. This is extraterrestrial visitations, which covers probably the 10 most extreme cases I had investigated up to that time, all involving either an onboard case or face-to-face encounter, and only a few cases involving hypnosis, by the way. I've only rarely, I've probably talked to a couple of hundred people who've had really profound abduction experiences at least, and I have only rarely referred them to a hypnotist if they're really dead set on doing it. So any cases of, any explanations of false memory syndrome or hypnotically induced memories can be pretty much laid to rest. This is UFOs over California, which covers pretty much, I wanted to write a historical type UFO book in the hopes that I could reach some skeptics out there. This is the Coronado Island UFO incident, which I co-wrote with Mike Evans, who's he's one of the main witnesses in this case. It involves a group of people who went down to San Diego and where they experienced a really profound and extreme close encounter case. So it was, I believe 10 people had one encounter on that night. So it involves quite a bit of physical evidence as well. It's one of the few multi-witness abduction cases. This I wrote actually for children. I didn't, dumb it down at all. I laid it all out there, and it's doing really well. It's one of my later books. And this is UFOs over New York, which follows up UFOs over California, and I'm hoping to do every state. It should take me about 50 years. And this is what I want to talk about tonight, UFO healings. And this was actually one of the first books I wrote, and I had heard about these types of cases in the literature, but I noticed that they weren't getting much attention. And in fact, there had been a few articles written about it, but no books at all. So I thought, well, this might be an interesting article. And I soon collected over 50 cases in just a brief survey of the literature. So I realized, this is a big idea, and I'm going to have to do a lot of research on this, which is exactly what I did. It took a couple of years, and I collected over 100 cases of UFO healings. Now, UFO healing can be defined as a UFO encounter in which the percipient experiences some improvement to their health. And this can be an onboard experience, or this can be just the near presence of a UFO. And these healings are, of course, conducted in different ways, which I'll get a little bit more into. But as Steve said, this is the first book ever to be published on this subject. And I, of course, did a lot of publicity writing for various magazines like the MUFON Journal. And I found that UFO healings have not gotten a whole lot of attention in the UFO community. And in fact, they were kind of relegated to the trash heap. And a lot of people, even researchers, kind of, I'm going to say that they were a little bit prejudiced against these types of cases because obviously they're hard to believe, and UFOs not only come with we have UFOs, but they're a package deal involving levitation and a lot of other paranormal type phenomena, and I think a lot of researchers shied away from the UFO healing aspect. So this is why I think it took so long for it to be even recognized. This is Virginia Aronson. She is a Florida-based UFO researcher who wrote Celestial Healings, which was kind of a follow-up of my book, UFO Healings, and covered a bunch of new cases. And she also interviewed me for the book and interviewed a lot of other witnesses. Here's another book about friendly UFO encounters. I think that since the literature is dominated, and pretty much the encounters for that matter, are dominated by accounts of gray type extraterrestrials and kind of scary abductions, we didn't hear a lot about these friendly type of cases as well. Fear sells. Fear is much more attractive often to the media. And people who have traumatic encounters often seek help and therapy, whereas someone who has a healing doesn't necessarily seek help and might be less inclined to reveal their case because of the ridicule factor. So that's another reason I think why these types of cases have been, ignored. This is Adrian DeVere, and he wrote a book which was called Healing Entities and Aliens. And this is another, his type of research involves more mediums and people who are in contact with UFOs who are able to do a healing sort of as a second party, or channeling the aliens, if you will. So there's been some attention paid to this finally. Now, the first person to actually pay any attention at all to UFO healings is a researcher by the name of Gordon Creighton. And he was the former editor of the Flying Saucer Review. He's now deceased, but he's the first researcher to ever write anything and recognize that these types of cases may be rare, but they're certainly a consistent feature that turn up again and again in not only very close encounter cases, abductions and onboard experiences, but people who have UFO flyby, flying over their car, for example. Bud Hopkins, arguably the leading UFO abduction researcher, and has written a number of books, including Missing Time, Intruders, Witnessed, and others, and has done an enormous amount of research into abductions. He has never written a word, as far as I can find, about UFO healings. But I did corner him at a lecture in San Diego at a convention and asked him if he had ever run across these types of cases. And he said, oh yes, absolutely, that he does run across them pretty rarely, but they do turn up. And he feels it's kind of sad because a lot of his clients are suffering from pretty severe illnesses and conditions and are not being healed. On the other hand, he says he does not feel the ETs are evil or bent on destruction, and they seem to be most interested in the human aspects of us and the good parts of us. So he kind of takes a benevolent view towards the whole thing. Whereas David Jacobs, not so much. His book, Secret Life and the Threat, paints a pretty scary picture, I think, of ET encounters, and I think part of the reason for that is because he's focusing on those types of cases, which are pretty scary. In spite of that, he's uncovered a number of really dramatic healing cases of diphtheria and other serious diseases, cancer. So he absolutely admits that we do run across these cases, and he's written about them a little bit. But as far as his opinion is that these are probably more akin to what he calls equipment maintenance, and some of his clients called equipment maintenance. Rather, they're being treated like a lab rat and don't feel that there's any altruism on the part of the aliens for being healed. Instead, they're just maintaining an experiment. Now, you get both kinds from the whole UFO researcher field. I contacted some researchers who feel that absolutely some ETs are benevolent, and some obviously feel not so much. And you get the same bell curve, I think, with experiencers. Well, that's one thing I always ask someone I interview, or when I'm researching their case, is do you feel the ETs are evil? And no one, pretty much without exception, feels this, of the people that I've talked to. Some feel that they're very unemotional, profoundly rude even, uncaring, but there's no evidence of what I would call sadism or Nazi-like torture. So as far as comparing them to humans, they seem to be more benevolent than your average human, and as far as the bell curve falls. John Mack is the only Pulitzer Prize winner, I believe, to write a book on UFOs, and he suffered for it as a result. But the book was very well received in the UFO community, certainly, and he did a follow-up. And in both of these books, he did reveal some healing cases, including a case of pneumonia, one of leukemia, and muscular dystrophy as well. So absolutely, he is another major researcher who recognized these types of cases. The point I'm trying to make is these cases may be rare, but every single major abduction researcher has run across these, almost without exception. Here's Edith Fiore. She's the first PhD to write a book on abductions. She says that fully half of the people that she researched experienced a UFO healing. And she feels that it's a major indicator, in fact, that you are having encounters. Barbara Lamb has spoken here before, probably several times, and she and I got involved in this field close to around the same time. She started out hypnotizing people to remember past lives and doing other, marriage, family, and child counseling, this type of thing, and sort of transformed into the whole UFO investigations, and is now arguably one of the leading, I don't want to call it abductions, researchers in the world, contact researchers. And she did contribute a few cases to the UFO healing book as well. Brad Steiger, he's been around forever writing this stuff, hundreds of books, and has uncovered, obviously, being involved in this field so closely, several UFO healing cases. Yvonne Smith as well, a California-based UFO researcher. She revealed that she had one gentleman who told her that he tested positive for AIDS and after an encounter tested negative. She was not able to confirm this, but it's one of many intriguing cases that I keep hearing about. And Wendell Stevens, of course, recently deceased. He has written a number of books, or co-written and published a number of books in which healing encounters take place. And a lot of these encounters are not necessarily in the United States. Some are, but he's uncovered cases in South America, Africa, throughout Europe. And in a lot of these cases, they're human-like aliens, and some they're not, which is an interesting statistic. I found that the type of aliens that are doing the healings are right through the entire spectrum, excluding perhaps the reptilian. I was not able to uncover any cases of reptilian healings, but otherwise we have cases involving praying mantis type ETs, gray type ETs, human-looking ETs, and sort of your catch-all category of different types. This is Richard and Lee Boylan, who wrote one of the first, full-length books on positive close encounters and uncovered several healing cases. He sent me a letter at my request in which he went into some detail on a couple of them, which I'll talk more about. All right. Now, I want to talk a little bit, before I get into the actual healing cases, about why aliens make good doctors. And the reason I think that they do make good doctors is because of all the number of abduction cases, and I'm one of those people who believe that abductions are probably very common, close to 1 in 50, as the Roper poll says, which is certainly what I found in my group of family and friends and coworkers. So I believe that they're pretty common. And according to Thomas Bullard, who did a survey of 300 plus onboard UFO cases, the one thing that varies the least, that most people experience when taken on board, is being physically examined. Turns up in case after case after case. I've heard it enough times where I can pretty much predict, how the details, a lot of them, of what a person is going to say to me as they explain their onboard experience. And they're examined much as our doctors examine people. Patients' clothes are removed, skin scrapings are taken, hair samples, saliva, blood, all of these things. And this is a very, very prominent feature in UFO encounters. And I've come to, doing research for this book, I kind of came to look upon UFOs almost as floating hospitals. Because this is the first thing that people think of when they're taken on board a UFO. This is the second point I want to make as to why I think aliens make good doctors, is because people describe these interiors of UFOs as being very hospital-like. And in fact, Travis Walton, when he was struck by a beam of light in Snowflake, Arizona, woke up and thought he was inside a hospital when in fact he was on board a UFO. So that turns up again and again, turned up in the Tahunga Canyon contacts. They described the whole interior of the UFO as being very hospital-like. Several of Bud Hopkins' clients also described the same thing, and one of them, Michael Bershad, actually went to a doctor and described what the aliens had done to him, and the doctor was amazed because he said only someone with advanced medical knowledge could be telling me the things you're telling me. So clearly these ETs have a great interest in the human body and know quite a bit about it, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if they know more about it than we do. So they make excellent doctors. Now, how do these healings take place? These healings take place in a number of different ways, and probably the most common feature I ran across in surveying these cases is light beams. And obviously these are not normal light beams like we have, like this one shining into my eyes, but rather coherent light beams, or light beams that are very difficult for the witnesses to describe because sometimes they seem to disobey the laws of physics. There's an inverse square law of light, and these are not following these laws. And sometimes these beams of light move very slowly, and these beams of light have different functions as well. They can render a person paralyzed, they can levitate a person, they can actually communicate knowledge as well, and heal people. So our understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum is not nearly as complete as these guys is. And the majority of healings are done usually using some aspect of light. Of course, that's not the only method. Now, all these illustrations tonight, most of them, are done by my sister-in-law, Kisara, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But I want to give her credit because we've worked closely together for many years, and these are her drawings. Now, there are some cases where people are given alien medicine. It's pretty rare, actually. The most common method of healing, honestly, is surgery. But there are other methods as well. There are a few cases where aliens use what appears to be mind power or a hands-on healing. And there's also a couple of cases where sound is used. But for the most part, it's surgery and instruments and light beams. Now, I want to talk a little bit about medical evidence. Medical evidence can make or break a case. And in fact, often it's the only evidence, the only physical evidence we have other than, say, maybe a photograph or a possible landing trace or multiple eyewitnesses. But medical evidence is actual physical evidence, and it can be very profound. And these are slides taken from Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time, which show scars that have appeared on people's body as a result of a procedure performed during an onboard UFO experience. And that's probably one of the most common forms of medical evidence. This is slides of Mike Evans, who experienced a great deal of medical issues as a result of his encounters in Coronado Island and in his home in Simi Valley. And in fact, as this next slide shows, it appears he's a nurse, and he's able to get access to a number of medical equipment and pull whatever strings necessary to get some MRIs done, which showed foreign objects in his brain. And so certainly he's not the only one who has this going on in his life. He's one of many people, and it seems to be more the rule than the exception that abductees in particular experience this kind of thing. So probably one of the most profound or common types of medical evidence is burns of some kind. This is a slide of Elaine Thomas, Mona Stafford, and Louise Smith, who in 1976 in Kentucky had an encounter with a UFO which chased them down the road, and they tried to outrun it. They were not successful, and the next thing they recall is being pulled up into this thing. And that's all they really recall, other than being set down, having missing time and being set down, at which point all three suffered pretty severe symptoms, including severe eye irritation, burns, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, and weight loss. They all had some recall of being taken into this thing. It was not a pleasant experience. They did go under hypnosis and relived it, and for them it was very harrowing, in fact. But the point I wanted to make here is that it was a really strong medical evidence case. Here's another case from England, actually, revealed by Timothy Good in his book, Above Top Secret. Denise Bishop here was outside her home in England when she saw a UFO pretty high up in the sky. It sent on a pencil-thin beam of light which struck her hand, rendering her paralyzed. And just temporarily, the beam retracted, and she went rushing inside, and her hand started to hurt. And over the next 2 days, this burn became much worse. And it was an odd reaction. Normally, you burn yourself, you blister right away. This took 2 days to become really painful. She went to the doctor and he's like, well, that's odd, you have a laser burn. Were you messing around with lasers? She says, no, this came out of the sky. A lot of these people are often reluctant to tell doctors what happened to them, and that's particularly true in UFO healing cases. And, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to jump to that. This is another medical evidence case which involves a man by the name of Stephen Michalik, who on May 20th, 1967 in Falcon Lake, Canada, got too close to a landed UFO. It took off and sent this blast of heat, and which burned him severely. He immediately started feeling ill, was rushed to the hospital, and over the next few months weeks and months, suffered many symptoms, including fainting, weight loss, headache, diarrhea, swelling of joints and hands, severe eye irritation. He lost 22 pounds, and his blood lymphocyte count went from a normal 25% to a very dangerous 16%. So he was examined by over 27 doctors who were baffled by his symptoms and could only conclude that he had some form of radiation sickness, which is another common, well, not common, but as far as medical injuries, that is one of the more consistently reported injuries. John Schussler, who headed MUFON for a while, wrote a book about all these cases back in the 90s and uncovered 400 or so injury cases. Likely there are a lot more injury cases as well as UFO healing cases. Now, there are only a few cases where people have died as a result of a UFO. It does happen. There was a number of very alarming cases like this one in Brazil. And that's where it seems a lot of these cases come from. These seem to be outlier type of cases, and certainly not the norm. But one really famous case of this type of thing is João Prestes Filho. And I wasn't able to get the exact date for this case, but it did occur in Brazil and involved a gentleman who said he was struck by a beam of light from a UFO and immediately suffered all these symptoms of radiation sickness and was rushed to the hospital, where basically he died instantly as his flesh was so cooked it kind of fell off the bones. So there are a few of these cases which are very alarming, and but for the most part I think that UFOs don't affect people. A physiological reaction as a result of a UFO encounter is relatively rare in UFO encounters, but it does happen. So let's get right to some of the healing cases. Now, I broke down the healing cases into 4 major categories, and I did it locationally, actually. I found that about 22% of healing cases take place actually in people's homes, usually in their bedroom. So aliens do house calls, although today's doctors often don't. Now, as far as the most common category, by far, is onboard UFOs at about 49–50% of people who are healed experience their healing right there inside the UFO. Another category, which is about 20%, involves people who are outside, and often this involves driving their vehicle, and often this is at night. But not always. They can be out in their backyard, or walking along the beach or what have you. But that's another category that I was able to find. And finally, and this blew me away, frankly, I was really shocked, is about 9% of the UFO healing cases take place in a hospital. And I know how that sounds, and for someone who's skeptical of this kind of phenomena, it doesn't help to talk about this kind of thing, but the truth is ETs can appear everywhere. I've had abductions reported by people who were in hotels, in the Marriott Hotel in Woodland Hills, for example, on like the 7th floor, or in a crowded condo in Arleta or Pacoima, or the dense suburb of Reseda. So absolutely these cases can take place anywhere. And so it's not that unlikely they could take place in a hospital as well. And in fact, here is an actual case which occurred in British Columbia. This is a Cowichan Hospital. And on January 1st, 1970, this nurse, Doreen Kendall, was actually in the hospital when she saw this UFO hovering right outside the children's wing. And she gave a description. There is what she looks like looking at this object. It's a really interesting case, and I think one of only many cases out there where UFOs have been seen hovering over hospitals. So you have to wonder, what they're doing hovering over these hospitals. And this is the exact area where the UFO hovered, right over the children's wing there. So pretty intriguing. Now, UFOs, they have healed all kinds of illnesses, conditions, diseases, injuries, everything from colds to cancer, chronic conditions even. In fact, I think the fact that they're healing chronic conditions has a lot to say about our own understanding of medicine, meaning that there really is no such thing as a chronic condition. Chronic really is another word for we don't understand, because the ETs are healing chronic conditions. But what I want to first talk about is some of the less dramatic cases, and some of the cases, for example, of healing of flesh wounds. And one of the most common cases that's been often quoted in a number of different major UFO books is the case of two police officers who were from Damon, Texas. Their names are Deputies Robert Good and Bill McCoy. And in Damon, Texas, on September 3rd, 1965, they were on their way home from a high school football game. And when they saw a UFO rising up from the side of the road, it was very large, about 150 feet across, 50 feet wide, football-shaped, and was sending down these violet beams of light. They were amazed and a little bit frightened when this beam of light came towards them and struck their car. Now, Deputy Robert Good had his arm outside the window at the time, outside his cruiser. And he said he could actually feel this beam of light hitting his arm. He said it felt a little warm, a little tingly, and they became frightened and took off. Now, Deputy Robert Good had actually been bitten by an alligator. It was his son's pet baby alligator, and it bit him on the finger. This was a pretty serious wound. It was bandaged up, it was painful, it was swollen, and recent. And he says instantly it stopped hurting. And as soon as they had a chance to pull over, they pulled into a diner and started discussing what they had seen. And he whipped off this bandage, and the cut was gone. There was not even any evidence of it, and this was confirmed by his partner, Deputy McCoy. And the case generated quite a lot of attention. In fact, they were later interviewed by an Air Force colonel who also expressed interest in the case. So it's one of the more famous UFO healing cases. Now, this is a slide of Jerry Wills from Kentucky. As a child, he had several sightings of these darting objects outside his home, and he would often watch them kind of as a pastime. And he says that one night, out of the forest comes this human-looking person who says, "I'm the guy from these UFOs that you're looking at." And he proceeded to have many conversations with him over, the next few years. He's what I would call a contactee. Now, some researchers feel that contactees are not real. And in fact, in the 1950s, there was a whole slew of contactees. You may be aware of them: George Adamski, George Van Tassel, Orfeo Angelucci, these types of people who claim to have contact with human-looking aliens, often beautiful, always friendly, giving them tours on board UFOs. And they were very well received throughout the 1950s and a little bit beyond that. But as abduction stories started to surface, these accounts kind of fell into disrepute. And there was many allegations, actually, of hoaxing, and a lot of major researchers kind of pushed these aside and don't research them or disbelieve them. Not all. Timothy Good is actually a supporter of George Adamski and other contactees. And I have come to the conclusion that the contactee movement never stopped. It was just kind of pushed underground, because I'm getting more and more reports of people who are really embarrassed to say that they have had contact with human-looking aliens. They're really afraid of being disbelieved. And Jerry Wills is one of these people who's actually come forward, and he says that as a child he had a very bad fever and was actually taken on board a UFO outside his home, and was surprised he didn't see the human-looking aliens. Instead, they were gray-type ETs. They proceeded to give him an injection in each arm and returned him to his bedroom, and where the next morning his fever broke. So he feels that he was treated for his illness. Here's another contactee, Richard Rilke from New Jersey. These are both contactees. Their stories were from George Randazzo's book, Contactee, which is actually pretty rare and difficult to find. But Richard Rilke says that he also was in contact with human-looking aliens who healed him on several occasions. He says in the early 1950s he had a sled accident where as a result his ear became infected and he lost his hearing. And he says the ETs came up and using no instruments at all, but rather just holding their hands up to his head, were able to cure him and reduce his inflammation to the point where the pain stopped. And he was later treated with penicillin, which brought back his hearing. And he said also as a young man he was working in a factory which involved forklifts and heavy equipment, and he crushed his finger. He went rushing to the nurse, said, "Oh my God, this is way beyond my expertise. You might lose that finger if you don't go to the hospital right now." He went to the hospital, and he says that while he was in the emergency room waiting to be treated, a doctor walked in, and it was one of his ET friends, he says. And I can't vouch for these cases, obviously, but for what it's worth, he's one of the people who says he was healed inside a hospital and through mind power. And he returned to work the next day, and the nurse apparently was very upset and thought he would have lost that finger and couldn't understand how it now showed no trace of any injury. So he's had a number of healings like this. He said he was cured of a tumor, and also he said he had a very bad, fatal auto accident. And the ETs told him that he was not supposed to die in this accident, which I found really interesting because I uncovered 2 other cases just like that. And one lady I was able to interview extensively who said that she had an auto accident in Georgia in which she actually died. She, under hypnosis, years later, she recalled leaving her body and finding herself inside a UFO where her body was, and there it was, but her face was completely torn up, her brainstem was broken, and the ETs told her, "You weren't supposed to die in this accident, but karmically we're going to have to leave some of these injuries on you, and we're going to return you to the scene of the accident after we finish healing you." And she says they took lights, and she watched as her own body was healed by these lights. And she was returned to the scene of the accident. They laid her out on the pavement in front of the car, and when the ambulance came, they never could figure out how she had apparently been thrust through the windshield, and there wasn't a mark on her face. So it was always a baffling mystery, and finally that mystery was solved. Now, this is a case taken from Bob Teet's book, West Virginia UFOs. These cases occur across the world, across the United States and many different countries. And this case took place in West Virginia to a man by the name of Daniel D., who had been having contacts pretty regularly throughout his life, where he would be taken on board, examined by gray-type ETs, who would do various procedures on him that were, for the most part, a mystery to him. One time, he was at home, actually, and he had an impacted wisdom tooth that was really bothering him. It was inflamed and swollen and infected, and he had no insurance, and he didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't have enough money, and he kind of meditated, asking the aliens if they would possibly heal him. It was just kind of a lark. He didn't really expect anything of it, and I think it's like the only case I could find where there's any connection where someone actually provoked a UFO healing or asked for one and got one. And that's exactly what happened. He was taken on board this craft, and he says the ETs stuck various things in his mouth, and the pain went away, and was no longer inflamed, and when he was returned, his wisdom tooth was no longer impacted. So, alien dental work. Now, I know he's not an accomplished artist, but it does give you an idea of the type of ETs he saw, and it's the same ones I hear most often. Of all the people I've interviewed, the hundreds and hundreds of people who've told me that they've seen aliens or been on board a UFO, I'm going to say about 70%, maybe a little more, have seen some variation of the grays, meaning, no hair, large dark eyes, short, 3 to 5 feet, maybe a little taller. no apparent clothes, or if there are clothes, it's a very tight uniform. And just a very similar description, though it appears that there are different types of grays, because some people will tell me these ETs, and that's what I'm going to call them, because I think that's what the evidence best shows, is that these are extraterrestrials. Most of them seem to, you get the whole pattern of some that are not very emotional, but there are a couple where the witnesses have told me the ETs are very emotional and very loving, grays even. So, but for the most part, they seem to be pretty kind of clinical, and much like a doctor doing his job, or maybe a military officer doing his job, very objective and just out there to do his work. All right, here's another case that I love this case because it's just so hard for me to understand why it took place. And this is Leonard Stringfield, who's probably most famous for his research into UFO crash retrievals, but did an enormous amount of work on abductions and sightings as well, and wrote a really amazing book called Situation Red, the UFO siege. And he revealed a case which occurred to a young man by the name of Chuck Doyle, who was 13 years old in Florence, Kentucky, when he walked out into his backyard and saw a manta ray-shaped UFO hovering over the neighbor's yard. And the neighbor had a pool, and this UFO was just maybe 10, 20 feet up, and it was sending down this little beam of light, which was playing across the surface of the pool. And Chuck Doyle became alarmed when he realized that this beam was sweeping back and forth and coming closer and closer to him. And he's like, oh my, it's going to get me. And so he turned to run. And that's when the beam of light hit him. And he was in such a position where he would have fallen if this beam of light was not holding him up. So it rendered him instantly paralyzed and kind of half levitated. And he says, at that moment, it felt like he had been struck by a bucket of ice water. It just chilled him to the bone. And he says a series of images and formulas appeared in his mind. Strange landscapes, weird colors, geometric shapes, numbers, and strange hieroglyphic type figures, this type of thing. And it all went pretty much over his head. He couldn't really remember a lot of it other than to describe it. And after a few seconds, this beam retracted, and he fell to the ground, went running inside and told his mom. They ran outside. There was no evidence of this thing. It was gone. But at the time, Chuck was suffering from a severe head cold. He was stuffed up and very congested. Immediately after being struck by this beam of light, there was no sign of the cold at all. It wasn't like a slow healing, or a quick healing process rather. It was healed instantly. And what I like about this case as well is not only being researched by a major UFO researcher, but they rushed him to the doctor the next day, and the doctor examined him. They told the doctor what happened, and the doctor says, well, I don't know what to tell you. You're no longer sick. You have a clean bill of health. So it's a pretty interesting case. And what intrigues me about this case is, why would aliens fly, let's say the closest star is 4 light years away, 4 light years, to heal someone of a child, no less, of a head cold? I don't know. Perhaps they're much closer around and they're not flying light years. Perhaps they're just out there zapping people with UFOs for fun, or with beams of light. It's hard to say, but it could possibly be that this was just an accidental side effect, which is entirely possible. But in some cases, these healings are obviously purposeful. Jacques Vallée is a major UFO researcher, one of the top 20, I'm going to say, at least top 100. There's a lot of UFO researchers out there lately, but he's written a number of books. And he's kind of retired a little bit from the UFO field lately, but certainly has had a profound effect on the whole field. And what's interesting about his research is he has concentrated a lot on the more paranormal or unusual aspects of UFOs, including healings. And in one particular case, which he did a great deal of research on, involved a medical doctor by the name of Dr. X. The man is anonymous. He resides in the French Alps, the doctor does, and on November 2nd, 1968, this doctor was in his home when he was woken up by flashes of light. And he rushed up and went to his son's bedroom where these lights were coming from and saw 2 discs that were hovering there outside the field behind his house. And as he watched, these 2 discs, they were like white on top and red on the bottom, came and combined into one disc, then turned towards him and flashed a powerful beam of light which struck him on the head and chest. It very badly dazzled him. He was disoriented and kind of stumbled, confused, to his bedroom where he went to sleep. And the next morning woke up and found this triangular mark on his abdomen. His son had an identical mark on his abdomen as well. But what was most profound and to me pertinent here and interesting was the physiological effects, where not only this rash, but this doctor had been in the Algerian War, and as a result of his injuries, was partially paralyzed on half of his body. It was severe enough where he had to give up his piano playing, and he was quite an accomplished musician, a pianist. After this beam of light hit him the next morning, all traces of his paralysis were gone, and he was able to start taking up piano playing again. So this had a profound effect on his life. And not only that, he's one of many people I uncovered in this book and in my research who have had more than one UFO healing. That seems to be a pattern. If you have one UFO healing, chances are much greater you're going to have another. And often these occur at the same time, which is what happened in Dr. X's case. A few days earlier, he had been chopping wood outside his home when the axe slipped and he badly gashed his ankle. Well, the next morning after he was struck by this beam of light from a UFO, the gash on his ankle was gone, no trace of it. So this is another really amazing case of a healing of a flesh wound. Timothy Green Beckley, he has been around for years and years doing UFO research. He's definitely one of the pioneers of this whole UFO movement. And he's uncovered a number of healing cases. One that is particularly interesting occurred on July 8th, 1974 to a New York columnist by the name of Brandon Blackman. I was not able to find Brandon Blackman, and I did try. But at any rate, according to Beckley, Blackman was in Prospect Park with a number of other people on that evening when they were watching a UFO, and it was hovering and doing kind of these falling leaf movements that we often hear described by witnesses. And didn't think much of it. It was very unusual. It was a UFO sighting. He's like, wow, I saw a UFO. And went home, and on the way home discovered that his finger, which had been cut, was no longer painful. And pulling off a bandage, found that the cut had been healed. There was no trace of it at all. Another one of these weird instant healings. And one of the few cases, well, actually there's a good portion of cases there where people are healed in a manner that they have no idea how it occurred, other than to be in the close presence of a UFO. So generally I would advise people not to run up to a UFO, but in some cases just being next to one apparently can affect a healing. And an interesting side note or end note to this case is when Brandon Blackman returned to his apartment, he couldn't get in. It was locked, which was odd because he had locked it, and you can't lock it unless you have the keys. And so after going through this whole rigmarole of getting the spare key from a friend and going in there, he found his keys right there on his bed, which he obviously didn't place them there. And he feels, well, there was a very unusual event that occurred just an hour before that, and then it must have something to do with that UFO sighting, but he has no idea what. But speaking of which, there are some similar cases like that, and in that earlier case I mentioned with Mona Stafford, Louise Smith, they had one of their rings was taken off, which they found later in an unusual place. So these things do happen. I've heard that with jewelry and other objects as well. Okay, eye cures. There are alien eye doctors as well. They know quite a bit about the whole ocular structure, and there are some really interesting eye cure cases. And one of the most famous ones occurred to an anonymous Peruvian customs official way back in December 9th, 1968. And he was out on his balcony when he saw a very small UFO quite high up in the sky, typical saucer-shaped, and as he's watching it, it sends down this purple beam of light, again purple. You get all different colors really, blue, white, purple, not much red or green, but you do get all the different colors of these beams of light. And it struck him on the head and chest and dazzled him. He had myopia. He was very badly nearsighted. And he noticed that he couldn't see with his glasses, took them off, and his vision was normal. It had been healed that instantly. He also suffered from rheumatism, which is an inflammation of, it's a systemic disease actually, an autoimmune disorder which involves inflammation. And he had rheumatism and suffered from it in his joints, and says that as a result of being struck by this beam of light, it cleared up over the next few days and never returned. And it was only one of several cases where people were cured of rheumatism or rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis. Here's another contactee, Howard Menger. Again, I cannot say whether or not this case is true or one way or the other. I tend to think that a lot of these contactee cases are true, and in fact the evidence is just as persuasive as abductees. And if you look at the cases in an objective way, they're not terribly different. A lot of these contactees were given warnings of nuclear disaster and environmental disasters or pollution, overpopulation, things like this. It was a very common theme in the 50s. Well, that theme has never stopped, and in fact is the second most common experience when you're taken on board a UFO, according to Thomas Bullard's study that I mentioned earlier. First is an examination, but the second is being told messages about nuclear proliferation and this type of thing. And the third is also, I think, really profound here, is being given information about healing or psychic kinds of things, past lives, how to do out-of-body exploring, how to do hands-on healing, how to do channeling. This type of thing turns up again and again in cases where people have really profound contact and have moved beyond sort of the fear barrier and are trying to get the best that they can out of their experiences. And but Howard Menger is your typical contactee who said that ETs spoke English, they were absolutely beautiful, and he was given rides basically aboard flying saucers, is what it amounts to. And he spoke widely about this and wrote a book about it as well, and said that he experienced a UFO healing when he was stationed on Okinawa. This was back during 1945 in April, when shrapnel, during an attack, shrapnel exploded and he was hit by it, and it infected first one eye, and he became blind in that eye, and then very quickly the other eye became infected and he became totally blind. And he was placed in an army tent hospital and was being treated as best as they could. And while he was there, he kept being visited by this mysterious nurse who no one could identify. And he eventually did see her when his sight returned. And she said, "I will see you on another occasion." And it was later, after he started having contacts. At that point, he did not know he was a contactee or had not been having contacts and UFO sightings. He met this lady on board a UFO. So for what it's worth, there's that cases. And certainly these healings are pretty consistent in the contactee accounts. But they're there in the abductee accounts as well. And here's a good example. Anna Jamerson and Beth Collings. Together they wrote a book called Connections. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. It's published by Wildflower Press. And their case took place back east. I forget the exact location. I believe it was Virginia or around that area. At any rate, Beth Collings, the Atoan, was having really profound experiences with UFOs, and in 1992 had a very harrowing abduction experience. And immediately as she was returning to her car, she noticed her vision was normal. And she thought she had her glasses on, but she didn't. Her vision had, for some reason, improved till she could see perfectly. And this was one of her strong indications that something really strange had happened, because she had a close-up sighting and some disorientation, possible missing time, but she wasn't sure. And it was around this time that her friend, Anna Jamerson, also, her eyesight dramatically improved. Anna did not have any memories of any encounters at the time, but it was such a dramatic improvement in her eyesight that was correlated at the exact time or similar time to her friend there, that she thought, well, gosh, maybe something's happening to me too. And sure enough, under hypnosis, they uncovered both a lifetime of contact. And it appeared, as it has been shown in other cases that they were manipulated to a certain extent by the ETs to come together, and remembered having had encounters together in childhood, even though they only met as adults. So the ETs are very neck deep in our affairs, even though it might not appear that way. This is a case very interesting from England, involving a police officer by the name of Alan Godfrey, who reported seeing a UFO. He was actually called out to investigate a herd of missing cows, of all things, which kept appearing and disappearing and appearing in different places, and he finally found them in a place where it looked like they were dropped out of the sky. There was no tracks around them. They were in an enclosure where they shouldn't be. So it was very odd, and he's driving around trying to figure out what is going on when he comes upon this dry spot or actually a UFO. It was drizzling and raining at the time, and this UFO was hovering over the road, and he quickly drew it, which is great advice. He sat there and drew this thing as he watched it, and thought it was just a sighting, but it turns out he had missing time. And the police officers, they rushed back there to the site after the UFO disappeared. The road was dry, and they had no explanation for that. Despite that and other evidence, he was ridiculed mercilessly by his fellow officers, and eventually his car was taken away. He was given a bicycle, which is not the only police officer who has suffered as a result of this, or other professionals for that matter, of going public with their encounter. But significant here is he was infertile due to a bar fight. He had been kicked very severely and as a result lost his ability to have children. And so after this encounter, a few months went by and his wife became pregnant, and he accused her of sleeping around. And she's like, no, I'm not. I had not slept around. And he thought for sure she had, because she's pregnant and he is infertile. So he went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, this is amazing. I don't know how to tell you this, but your condition has been reversed. You're no longer infertile. In fact, you're fine. So this is one of 3 or 4 cases like this in the book that I found. Other researchers have uncovered these types of cases, including Barbara Lamb and Brad Steiger. One of my favorite cases is this one, which occurred to a man by the name of Carl Higdon in 1976 outside Rawlins, Wyoming. It's a really amazing and extensive case involving a great deal of evidence. He was out there elk hunting, actually, and had spotted an elk and shot at it when the bullet left the gun very slowly and then dropped to the ground. He was like, well, this is not normal. And he looked around, and there was a strange-looking figure with spiky hair and a weird belt and kind of a jumpsuit, human-looking, who floated over a little pill, and Carl Higdon, not knowing why, swallowed it. And this alien motioned him on board a UFO, which was pretty small, but inside it was much larger. He saw some other people in there. He saw other aliens. He saw a whole group of animals that were in glass enclosures. He was examined or had some other procedures given to him, and it appears at one point he may have actually been taken to another planet, though this is not clear. But it was a really profound experience, and he was eventually, while this is all going on, there are other people out looking for him because he's missing. And this UFO drops him back. His truck is found in a different location from where it had been, and he was very dazed. He was very upset, very traumatized. A couple of people who were looking for him saw the UFO as it darted away, and he was found and immediately taken to the hospital and examined, and his condition was confirmed by everyone who was around him, including his wife and his people who were searching for him. So it's a really amazing case. And it's not very well-known case, and what's even less known about it is the fact that he had 2 profound healings. He had suffered from tuberculosis and had to go to the doctor every year to make sure it wasn't progressing and that his lungs, which were badly scarred, were okay. And when he went to the doctor next, they're like, well, this is impossible. You have no scarring in your lungs. All those tubercular scars are gone. And we have no way to explain this. And the only explanation he could find is that it was his encounter with a UFO. And incidentally, at the same time, he was suffering from kidney stones, a bad case of it, and he would have frequent flare-ups. He never had a flare-up after that, and went to the doctor, and there was no sign of his kidney stones either. So it's an amazing case, and I think one of the ones that shows that there is, positive aspects to these UFO encounters. We hear so much about how scary abductions are. Certainly they can be, but there are positive aspects to it. Jim Sparks, he's going to be speaking at this upcoming convention, which hopefully a lot of you will go and hear him speak, because he is amazing. I interviewed him once when I was doing a radio show, and I've read his book, of course, and he's one of the few people who is a conscious abductee. He remembers his experiences without the aid of hypnosis. And it's amazing, because as I'm interviewing him, I'm like, have you read Betty Andreasen's book? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, you're saying stuff that I've heard in that book. And he says, no, I've stayed away from all the books. I haven't read anything. And yet the stuff he's saying is corroborated by a number of other different witnesses. And he says he had an amazing experience. He was a heavy smoker for a while. And the ETs warned him against it, actually, and said that they were going to give him a gift. And they took him on board a UFO, and they showed him a clear box filled with this black goo. And they said, this is your gift. And he's like, what is that? And they said, we pulled this out of your lungs. So it's a lung cure. He wasn't sick at the time, but certainly they improved his health. Or he feels that way. This is the case involving Alicia Hansen, who I mentioned earlier, who had an auto accident in Georgia in which she was actually killed and apparently brought back to life by these ETs. She's had profound UFO experiences her whole life. Her neighbors have UFO experiences as a result of living next to her. Her roommates, her friends. She showed me a UFO twice, took me out, and damned if we didn't see this giant UFO. So this lady is for real, and I'm very impressed by her. And she's had profound experiences involving abductions, and at one point just became so upset with it, said, I don't want to feel this fear anymore. And in the middle of an abduction, she woke up and she says, you put me back in my house right now. I'm not going to allow this. And they're like, you woke up. Oh, all right, sorry. And they basically put her back in her bedroom. Another time she woke up frightened to see these gray-type aliens next to her bed. She reached out and struck it and broke its neck, and later learned that she had actually killed it. One of several cases I've heard of just like that, where someone lashes out in fear. And frankly, the aliens shouldn't be appearing like that by people's bedsides and frightening the wits out of them. But she got over her fear, and as a result got a number of really profound experiences in which she was taught all kinds of stuff about spirituality mostly. Channeling and healing, and she really does profoundly channel healing energy. I've had her do it to me, and you can actually feel it, and it's quite amazing. And she's had some really amazing UFO healings herself. On one occasion, she had a cyst in her breast. It was diagnosed, and she was set up to have surgery, and in fact was going to have surgery the next day when she had an encounter that night, and doesn't remember a lot of what happened. So a lot of her stuff is still encountered or covered in amnesia, not all of it, but she just remembered that something came into her room, the ETs were there, they were doing stuff, and she went to the doctor the next day, and they're like, well, and this is odd, what are these scars here, these laser scars? And she's like, I don't know. And they're like, well, you had surgery. She says, no, I didn't. And they're like, well, yes, you did. Here's the evidence. And she denied it, and the doctors became very upset, and because they felt she was lying. And she didn't want to tell them the truth, which is something I've run across over and over again. And they continued to examine her, and they took x-rays, and they're like, well, this is odd. There's fluid here in one of her, inside of her body, which is present only after having surgery. So clearly you've had surgery. And she continued to deny it. And I've run across this with other patients as well. So I would personally recommend telling your doctor what happened, because that's profound evidence, and they may be able to, provide some insight, certainly. But that's one of many cases like that. And another practically... yeah, that was... She says, yeah, it is. She says the aliens she's been with have been many different types, and that was one type. And for her, they're very emotional and loving often, though weren't in the beginning. only until she reached a certain level of awareness and self-control, she says. Now, this is Bill Hamilton, very well-known researcher, written a number of books, and uncovered a case identical to this case I just discussed. The case involves a lady by the name of, also Southern California, Morgana von Clausen. That's a pseudonym. At any rate, Morgana was diagnosed with a cystic mass in her breast, and doctors had the x-rays, and she was scheduled for surgery, and I believe it was the day before surgery again, when she was driving with her son, and a UFO started following their car. And her son said, "Look, Mom, it's a UFO. I think this is going to be a good sign. You're going to be all right." And she didn't know. She's had, not necessarily pleasant experiences all the time with these UFOs. But that evening, something came into her room. There was lights and activity. She doesn't remember exactly what it was. But the next day, she went to the doctor, and they're like, "Well, this is odd. There's no trace of your cyst. We must have been mistaken." And this is an explanation they often come up with. Well, misdiagnosis, spontaneous remission. And certainly spontaneous remission does occur pretty regularly in hospitals. And there's not a whole lot of explanations for it. And perhaps this is one of them. Okay, this is Sisto Paz Wells, a contactee from Peru, actually, who became very well known for being able to call down UFOs on demand, and did so numerous times for the media, and as a result had a very powerful, and well-received UFO movement, and lots of people joined his group, the Rama group, I believe it was called, and he would go touring various areas and bringing down UFOs, and he did this up in Sebago Cabins, New York, in May of 1988. Brought a group of 100 or so people there, and they did these meditations and various things like this, and brought down a UFO, and it was seen not only by this group of 100 or so people, but by all the surrounding residents. And it put on a pretty profound light show for everyone involved. And that evening, when everyone retired to their cabins, one gentleman, an anonymous dancer, says that something came to his room last night, and it lit up, and he doesn't remember exactly what happens, but he woke up and his pajama bottoms had been removed and were on the floor. This is something I've heard many times. People will say that they wake up and their blanket is rolled up and tucked in very tightly so that they're stuck to their bed. I've had 3 or 4 cases like that. Weird stuff, or people's clothes are put on backwards, or not their clothes even, though that's pretty rare. And so he says his pajama bottoms were removed, and he woke up and his legs were fine. The condition he had wasn't described, but apparently it was severe enough where he had to give up his career as a professional dancer. And after this experience, he was able to dance fine. Now, this is Billy Meyer. By show of hands, how many of you support Billy Meyer? Do you believe him? Not a whole lot of you. Interesting. There's some, though. I tend to support his case simply because it's got so much evidence. In fact, I think it might have more evidence than any other single case. Not only the photographs, which of course are controversial, but landing trace cases, metal fragment cases, audio recordings, film recordings, and for me, most convincing are the 200 plus eyewitnesses who have seen UFOs in his presence. And like a lot of UFO contactees, the more, I think, big a case is, like the Ed Walters case in Florida, or this Billy Meyer's case, the more widely they are attacked. And certainly that's the way it should be, because they're making fantastic claims. But I think if you look at this case objectively, it's quite impressive. And he has had 3 instances of healings, he says. One was when he was a child, and when he suddenly recovered for some reason from pneumonia. Everyone thought he was going to die, but overnight he recovered. Years later, he found out the aliens told him that he was in contact with, told him that they had cured him. On another occasion, he was in his home, in the living room, surrounded by people, when he disappeared in a flash of light. It was viewed by 2 people who watched it happen, and at the time he was very ill with what he thought was just a cold. It turned out it was pneumonia. And the ETs were very upset with him, they said, and that he was on the edge of death, and they healed him and told him to go to the doctor next time. And on another occasion, he fell off his moped on the way to a contact and broke his rib, and he says that was healed with an instrument which sent kind of shocks into his broken rib and heal it that way, which is a procedure we actually use at our own hospitals, using electrostimulation to cure broken bones. Now, this is a case which I took from Edith Fiore's book, Encounters, involving a lady by the name of Linda, who she and her sister Sherry have had a number of amazing healings. They recalled their encounters under hypnosis, but under hypnosis they recalled being taken on board, and the encounters were not traumatic. In fact, it was quite friendly, and they said that there was a number of people being taken on board and who were all being given procedures which were healing procedures. People were being healed of a wide variety of conditions, she says. And when her turn came, they healed her of a yeast infection. And she also said that she was given regular treatments for a weak liver. As a child, she had fallen and injured her liver on the jungle gym, and was very prone to infections. And they said that they were treating her for that. And on another occasion, they told her that she had breast cancer. This is the types of ETs that she's seeing. And they told her, you have breast cancer and we need to cure you. And that's exactly what they proceeded to do, using this instrument primarily, pressing it up against her, and other instruments as well. She says it was actually a pretty painful operation. And I'll talk more a little bit about at the end of this lecture in just a bit about some of the cancer cases. But that seems to be a rule in some of these cancer operations. They're excruciating. So she and her sister both had numerous healings. And in fact, it was such a kind of a casual atmosphere. Once when she was being healed, she asked the aliens, do they do breast enlargements? They did not respond. This is probably my second favorite case, involving a gentleman by the name of Ventura Misiras, which occurred on December 30th, 1972 in Argentina. He's a night watchman. And this is back, before UFOs were pretty much popularized in the media in terms of abductions and things like this. And certainly UFO healings were not very well known at all. And Ventura was 73 years old at the time when he was struck by a beam of light from a UFO. He actually saw these ETs, which he drew there, looking a little bit like the Michelin Man, their costumes. A description I've heard before, actually. And there's a lot of evidence to support this case. The tops of the very tall eucalyptus trees in the area were also burned. A bunch of catfish were found dead in the local stream right where this object was hovering. And Ventura, immediately after this object, went over him, struck him with a beam of light, and he may have had onboard contact with some clear, but apparently not. At any rate, he suffered a number of symptoms, including headache, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, pustules or little boils on his skin, and all these other symptoms that seemed to indicate radiation sickness. And he was actually, his case was very well investigated. He was descended on by all kinds of UFO researchers, police officers, government agents, officials of all kinds. And when all was said and done, he was interviewed by more than 60 different, doctors and officials who could not explain his case. And what was most amazing about it was about a month after he was struck by this beam of light, he started to grow a third set of teeth. And it was just the only case I have of where someone is growing an extra set of teeth as a result of being struck by a UFO. But the teeth are part of the integumentary system: hair, skin, teeth, and nails, and part of the eyes. And there's a lot of cases where the UFOs have healed people of the integumentary system. And this is probably one of the most, the best investigated or most credible. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of cases which do take place in hospitals, and this is one which I thought was kind of intriguing, involving a gentleman by the name of Fred White, who was an electronics inventor and specialist. And he lives in Durham, England, and about 4 years prior to this incident, he had seen a UFO while fishing, and it was hovering over this lake. There were portholes, and he saw these figures looking out at him, human-looking, kind of, and he thought, well, that's odd. The UFO darted away. 4 years later, he's diagnosed with a hole in his heart. And it collapsed or his lung, I'm sorry, and it collapsed his lung. And it was a very serious condition. It was apparently congenital, they weren't sure, but he was suffering very badly from it, could not catch his breath, and had a lot of pain, when in walks this strange doctor. And this doctor says, I'm going to heal you. And Fred is like, oh, great, okay, that's why I'm here. He didn't think really much of it at the time, whether or not this was a human or not, because he looked human, but he did notice the guy was kind of exotic looking, with kind of a slant to his eyes, and was not Caucasian, was definitely some exotic person. And I was also wearing a watch which had no face to it. It was just this glowing timepiece of some kind, but there was no numbers, no dials, no arms or anything. But he did notice that, and this figure proceeded to heal him, said, using kind of a passes of his hand over Fred's body, back and forth. Instantly he was able to breathe better and the pain receded. And this gentleman said he had healed him because he was interested in his research in electronics. And I thought that was really interesting, because I've been looking for patterns as who is being healed and why. And I found that it goes basically in 3 categories. 30% of people who are being healed are contactees, people who claim to have contact with friendly aliens. 30% are abductees. And 30% are people who have no prior relationship with UFOs at all. And the rest are people who are friends of a contactee or an abductee. So it's hard to break down who's being healed and why. It seems there's a few more men than women, though I'm not sure if that's because there are more male contactees who have gone public than women. Certainly there seems to be more women reporting abductions, which is kind of at odds with the fact that more men are reporting healings. So it's hard to say, but the one pattern I certainly did find, and this was confirmed independently just recently, not by me, by another person, is that people who are doing good work for humanity, and by that I mean inventors, doctors, police officers, social workers, actors, even dancers, entertainers, things like this. This is what the only real pattern I found, and it wasn't super strong, but it was there. This is my favorite case, hands down, of UFO healings. And I'll get shortly, right now I'm running a little late, am I? But I'll wrap this up pretty quickly here in like 15 minutes, and I'll just cover the more serious cases and the cancer cases. But I want to talk about Jonathan Salter here at length, because it's such a profound case. He had an abduction experience in Richland Center with his son. They were driving along, and when they saw a UFO, typical UFO, and had missing time. And at the time, they didn't remember anything. They didn't go into hypnosis, but over the next few weeks, both of them recalled spontaneously what happened. And they said it was not a traumatic experience. He recalled being taken on board a UFO. They were both laid out on tables, and each of them, but particularly John Salter, his name is actually now John Hunter Gray. He changed it back to honor his Native American heritage. Both of them were laid out on tables and given injections, particularly John Salter Jr., the father, rather. And he said the injections were in interesting locations, and that they were mostly in his various glandular areas, lymph nodes, and sort of strategic areas. And they were returned. He says it was not an unpleasant experience. It was much like a doctor's visit. And he says he was not traumatized by it at all. In fact, just the opposite, because immediately he started noticing a number of physiological improvements, which have numbered up to 20 at this point, or beyond that. The first thing was he was a heavy smoker. He stopped smoking immediately, just did not have the desire. He attributes that to his encounter. That's one way to quit smoking, you guys. He also says that he's experienced immediately an improvement to his skin tone. He says his cuts started healing faster. Several of his wrinkles disappeared. He lost weight. He had a facial injury as a result of an auto accident. This quickly was healed up and went away. Several other things. His hair and fingernails grow. He started getting 5 o'clock shadow again. He grew 2 inches, which I find really fascinating because there are a number of cases out there where people have been struck by a beam of light from a UFO and suffered really profound growth afterwards. It's very rare, but it does happen. And he is now in his 70s and still in good health, has suffered some episodes, but always recovers in a way that seems to amaze doctors. And here's the kicker, which is really kind of shocking to me. Before his experience, his feet measured size 11. They now measure size 17. Go figure. Here's a case from Edith Fiore's book, Encounters. This gentleman suffered from angioma as a child. Angioma is a malformation of the blood vessels in the vein, which leads usually to paralysis, loss of speech, loss of facilities, and often death. It can be very severe, and was in his case, and he was not doing well when suddenly his condition improved really dramatically, very quickly. And later on, when he was an adult, he began having a series of profound UFO experiences and went under hypnosis and recalled as a child being taken on board a UFO and cured of his angioma. So he says basically what happened was they removed the top of his head and took a laser beam and put it right up against the blood vessels that were malformed, and doing so were able to shrink them down to their normal size. So it's a really amazing case, and one of many cases which aliens have cured people of supposedly chronic or even fatal conditions. And there's the tool that these people use, these aliens use to heal people. It's interesting because people will often describe these tools in a way that they're completely baffled by them. They have no words to describe them other than to say that they're cylindrical often and have lights coming out of them and just look strange. Now, this is the ET that he says healed him. Now, I see you get all kinds. I have never talked to anyone who's seen anything like that. A number of cases came out in the 1980s, which I'll just mention briefly because I'm running out of time, in Russia, as investigated by Helga Moro, a researcher. It was really profound because they all occurred at once in this one area called Tbilisi, or I can't pronounce it. It's in the book, T-B-I. Tbilisi. Okay, thank you. Tbilisi. But apparently there was more than a dozen UFO healing cases, including some doctors who were actually contacted by ETs and given treatment methods. And these were healings of heart attack victims, of someone who had liver disease, someone who had knee problems, a wide variety of conditions. This is Katarina Wilson, who was outside her home in Oregon when she suffered a near lightning strike. And went running into her home and not realizing how badly she was injured, but immediately found herself on board a UFO. She's had a huge number of contacts and has written an amazing book about it. And the aliens told her, you damaged your heart. Your heart was badly damaged in that lightning strike. And we are repairing your heart. And that's exactly what they did. And she drew this drawing here to describe exactly what this instrument looked like. And it was a very quick operation. And she woke up the next morning. She was pretty sore there, but suffered no apparent injury as a result of this close lightning strike. This is a really bizarre case. I'd recommend this book just because it really makes you think. This is a family up in Oregon who claimed to have contact with human-like ETs. Initially they remembered them being very gray type, but as time went on they kind of recovered their memory, I guess you might say, and recalled seeing them much more human-looking. And so they were taken on board many times and given all kinds of healing experiences and profound, just spiritual experiences as well. The father says that he was tripped while he was on board the UFO, hurt his back, and the aliens healed it using a cylindrical device. I've heard a description of that cylindrical device being used on people's backs from several other people, which I thought was kind of a corroboration, or to make his case more credible. His child was cured of asthma. The mother said that she was visited in her hospital room after having a C-section, and that the ETs were able to speed up her healing, and that doctors and nurses were amazed at how quickly her C-section scar healed up, that she was able to be released very quickly. So this is one family who have had a total of like 7 healings between them. This is a really interesting case, which was first revealed by in one of Wendell Stevens' books, and involves this man by the name of João Valerio, and this is him and his son, who are contactees. And what happened was there was a child in this town where this contactee lives, who suffered a cerebral aneurysm, and this child was very popular in the town, and everyone in this town knew that João Valerio was a contactee, and asked him to ask the aliens if they could help this kid out. And João said he'd try, and that's exactly what he did. And the alien says, give him this medicine. This is the aliens that he saw, and here is the medicine. And it was described as being very similar to raw sugar in appearance and composition, kind of dark or light brown with sharp crystals. And the aliens instructed them to rub it into the soles of his feet, which they did. It melted at body temperature and disappeared into the kid's skin, and immediately his blood vessels began to repair. And he recovered, made a full recovery from a cerebral aneurysm, which is not supposed to be recoverable. He was, they thought he was going to be brain dead. But no, he made a full recovery. Thankfully, they did save a sample of this medicine to take for chemical analysis. And it was a very expensive chemical analysis was run on it. And they tested for all different kinds of substances and were not able to match it to any known substance. And at the end, all they could say was it was chemically unique. Doesn't help a whole lot, but interesting nevertheless. Now, there have been several cases where people have not been healed themselves, but have viewed healings on board a UFO, such as this case, which took place in Sturgeon Bay in Wisconsin in 1979 to a man by the name of Dean Anderson, who said he saw a child who was on board this UFO with her mother. The child suffered from muscular dystrophy and could barely walk. Her condition was severe, and they put her up on this table and sent a beam of light on her and cured her. She hopped off the table, cured. Another case investigated by Carla Turner involves a man by the name of Fred, who was taken on board a UFO and said he saw a number of people being laid out on tables, and the aliens were taking these laser-like, these instruments, and they were zipping people open, fussing around with their organs, doing whatever it is they were doing, and then they'd zip them up with this laser, straight out of Star Trek, and you could not tell that there had been any cut there at all. So there are a number of cases like that. I want to talk about now, wrap it up, and talk about the cancer cures, because I think this is probably the most common category out there of all the healings we have. Certainly, aliens have touched on a wide variety of illnesses and conditions, but cancer comes up again and again, and certainly kills quite a number of people in the world. And so it's no surprise that there are a number of cancer cases. One case I'd like to discuss involves a lady by the name of Helen X. This case was first revealed by Timothy Green Beckley, who says that Helen told him that she was a resident of Arizona, and in May of 1974 was diagnosed with cancer of the hip bone. And doctors removed it, and she was well at first, but returned back for another check, and it turns out that the cancer had spread from her hip bone to her breast, her liver, her kidney, her pancreas, and her spleen. They tried to get it all out. They couldn't. They did the best they could, and basically said she's got a few months to live. Her condition worsened very quickly to the point where she was so weak she could barely get up, and her skin had become the color orange. And one evening she woke up to someone here calling her name. She pulled herself out of bed. She had such a strong impulse that she could not resist it. This turns up again and again in abduction cases. She went into her car. She's like, what am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this. I'm very ill. And she drove out of town a short distance. She lived in a small town in Arizona, and came into this field, and there was a UFO parked there. and there were these aliens outside. She said they were short, dressed in shiny silver metallic suits, and they took her on board and they said, "You have cancer." She said, "Oh, yeah, I know." And they said, "We're going to cure you." And they proceeded to give her a very lengthy, painful operation involving all kinds of instruments and lights and things like this. And she doesn't recall exactly what happened. She recalls driving home. She recalls going to bed and waking up the next morning and thinking, well, this must have been a dream. And that's what her son's like, no, definitely it must have been a dream. She's like, but you know what? I don't think it was. I want to go visit this spot where I remember being taken. And the son's like, no, you're too sick. And she's like, we're going. And he drove her to this spot, and in this spot there was a big circle of crushed grass, burned ground. So it was really profound evidence for her. And her condition worsened at this point. She was rushed to the hospital, and doctors gave her last rites. They called her family. They said she's going to die within a couple of hours, definitely within the day. And she hung on. The ETs, before they released her, told her, don't take any more medicine. Whatever you do, don't take anything the doctors give you. Just drink water. This is what they told her. So they tried to force more medicine into her. She refused. She said, give me water. And that's what they did. And she took water and she hung on. They couldn't believe it. She hung on for a day, and then the next day and she started to improve. And very dramatically improved after a week or two. And then finally she was healthy. They searched her for cancer, opened her up, did an exploratory operation, and could not find any cancer. So it's a really profound case. And this is typical of these cancer-type cases of healings. Another case involves a Peruvian truck driver. This was investigated by Jacques Vallée, I believe. And this truck driver had stomach cancer and didn't want to have an operation because it involved the removal of a large portion of his stomach, and which is obviously very severe. And was driving down the road, and on this particular trip the pain was so severe that he's like, that's it, I've got to have the operation. And boom, a UFO shows up. Nice timing. And it casts down a beam of light, and whether he had missing time is not described. This case was not given a whole lot of attention. I couldn't find a lot of details about it, I mean. At any rate, after this UFO left, his pain disappeared, and he went to the doctor to have the operation, and they couldn't find any cancer. Very typical. Another very similar case occurred to Lycia Davidson, who is actually based here in Los Angeles. She had cancer, and it spread very quickly. The doctors told her it was fatal. She was abducted by these ETs who had been bothering her whole life, and they said, you have cancer, as if it was news to her. And it certainly wasn't. And they proceeded to give her a very excruciating operation. She said it was awful, but it was no worse than what she had already gone through with human doctors. And they returned her, and the cancer was gone. She went to the doctor, and they could not find any traces of it. She had a lot of military harassment afterwards. Not only this, but after all of her encounters, for that matter. It says that ETs don't bother her so much. It's the military who she's terrified of and can't stand and wish that would leave her alone. So there are another number of cases like that. Probably the most famous cancer healing case I want to discuss is took place to a child, actually, of a politician, a famous politician in Brazil. And this occurred on October 25th, 1957. This child was dying of stomach cancer when ETs landed in the backyard, and this was witnessed by the entire family. And recently, there's a researcher making the whole talk circuit now discussing this case, and one of the people there has also been discussing it. But the maid was the first one who revealed it. And this is one of the first UFO healing cases actually ever revealed. And I believe they were green-skinned ETs, if I'm not mistaken. At any rate, they were not your typical type. They were very short humanoids, dressed in strange jumpsuits, came into the living room while everyone was present, including the daughter who was suffering horrendously and expected to die, and proceeded to do an operation on her. They first held up an instrument which rendered her stomach transparent so that the whole family could see inside her body the black mass that was the cancer. And then they proceeded to remove it, sucking it up with various instruments and cutting it out and shining it with lights, and closed her back up and gave her a metallic sphere filled with 50 pills and told her to eat one every day, which she did. And the cancer went into remission, and she never suffered from it again. She lived. So one of many amazing cancer cases. There are other serious diseases too. I'll just mention real briefly, on August 3rd, 1979, Army officer Jean Cyr of Quebec, that's C-Y-R, Jean Cyr, kept seeing UFOs outside his home. He lives near an airport. There were people in the area seeing UFOs. His family was seeing UFOs. And he started waking up with weird scars on his body and things like this. He suffered from very serious disease of, I believe it was muscular dystrophy. Gosh, I wrote that down here. No, I'm sorry, multiple sclerosis. And he says after these series of encounters, he stopped suffering from multiple sclerosis and it eventually disappeared completely. So one of many cases like that. The earliest UFO healing case I found was from 1930 when a gentleman said he was taken on board a UFO. He didn't know it was a UFO at the time. It wasn't until the 70s that he started hearing reports about it. And he was placed into a cylinder which was filled with light, and he was cured of tuberculosis. He was later cured of a fatal auto accident when his auto was hit by a train. And I'm going to wrap it up now. This is one of the final cases I want to discuss, which is really amazing. Lynn Plaskett. She is currently a city councilwoman in Smyrna Beach, Florida. And this case is not in the book. There are a number of cases I've discussed tonight which are not in the book because so many people have contacted me saying, oh, I was healed of deafness, I was healed of infection of a tattoo, I was healed of this or that. And this case involves a lady who was cured of cancer. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer, a very aggressive form, when she was in her mid-20s. And she had just gone in there to doctor to get birth control, and they diagnosed her, they found a lump, and took a biopsy and found this very aggressive cancer, and she quickly started to suffer from it, and her case went downhill, and it looked like she was going to die, like the doctor said, when one evening she woke up, and her window was open, and this frisbee comes flying in. It wasn't a frisbee. It had little lights around it, and it was spinning, and it was hovering over her body. She became paralyzed at this point. It was making a loud buzzing noise, which the people outside her bedroom heard, and are like, what's that? We should go investigate. Nah, they didn't do it for some reason. At any rate, this object goes up and down her body several times and then disappears. And she had this profound feeling of well-being at the time, thinking, this is good news. This is good for me. And it was. Her cancer quickly went into remission and never appeared. And she is still a city councilwoman, which is nice, considering she did go public with her encounter and appeared on a number of TV shows. And was written about in Virginia Aronson's book. It has a whole detail of her case. And one of many people who are cured of cancer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, who is being cured? Not a whole lot of patterns there. The closest pattern I could find was related to your profession. So if you're a social worker, like John Salter, who was a very influential social worker and has won numerous awards for it, or an electronics inventor, like that guy in England, Fred White, or a police officer like Deputy Good out there doing the beat, or a dancer, or an actor, doctor. These are the kinds of people who are being healed. For the most part, that's the only pattern I could find. Are aliens friendly? I could not possibly prove that aliens are friendly any more than I could say that humans are a benevolent species. I think it would be a lot harder to prove human benevolence as opposed to alien benevolence. But as I said, most of the people I've interviewed do not want their encounters to stop. Some have had some very harrowing encounters and still feel that the ETs are not evil. And most feel at the worst that they're uncaring. This lady I interviewed had a number of encounters when she had missing time. Marks would appear on her body. She'd find twigs in her bed. Her clothes would be on wrong. This went on over and over and over. And one night, she's taking her motorcycle through the Wasatch Mountains in New Jersey when she wrecks it and twists up the Kickstarter to the point where this bike could not be started. And this was a rural road. This was the middle of the night. She was stranded. She had no idea what she was going to do when she says what she calls her friends showed up. She says they could have passed for a human if they wore sunglasses and a hat, but otherwise no, because their skin is very pale white and their eyes were very large with very large, dark parts to them. They didn't say anything. They just walked right up to her and indicated that they wanted to fix the motorcycle. She stepped back, they lifted it up. One of them bent down and straightened out the Kickstarter, she says, and fixed it. They stepped back, she hopped on the motorcycle and took off, kind of freaked out at this point. So this is the kind of case you're thinking, well, that seems friendly, but then you run across other cases which, maybe not so much. So it's really hard to say whether or not ETs are doing this out of their goodwill or not. I try to let the witnesses speak for themselves, and certainly a good percentage of witnesses do feel that it is being done as an act of goodwill. Others feel, no, it's more like equipment maintenance. Some feel it was an accidental side effect. So I think you get the whole bell curve there. Here's another case where ETs helped out. This was during one of the worst storms in the South Pacific in recorded history, which sunk, upwards of 24 boats. And this one boat, filled with people, it was called the Ramtha, by coincidence, was about to sink when this very bright light appeared right over it. The rescuers could not find the boat. And this bright light appeared, and as a result, the rescuers were able to pick these people up, and shortly after they picked them up, the boat sank. So this is another one of those weird, intriguing cases where ETs are seeming to help people. And again, there's a very strong healing theme that comes across not only in terms of physical healings, but spiritual healings. It's the second or third most common thing is people being told how to do hands-on healing or being taught about healing. And that seems to be another pattern that turns up again and again is ETs are very interested in people who are psychic or who are involved in alternative healing methods. This is the Integratron in Southern California here out in the desert, and this was a building which was allegedly designed by ETs or upon ET specifications, which was supposed to rejuvenate the human body. It was never completed, but one wonders, if perhaps it was, what would have happened, and would it have worked? Whitley Strieber, one of the most influential UFO writers, certainly, and I included him as my last slide because I think he illustrates what's problematic with this whole UFO healing subject. He receives upwards of 20 letters a day, or did during his heyday, and certainly has received thousands upon thousands upon thousands of letters from people begging him to ask the aliens to heal them. And he obviously can't do that. We all suffer illnesses, and he's no exception, and he has not been healed. And these ETs are not healing all these people. And so that begs the question, why not? The healing is taking place. There's no doubt about that. There are easily hundreds of cases, probably 200 cases now on record, and I'm going to say there's 10 times more than that because these cases are vastly underreported. So healing cases are taking place on a limited basis, but it seems to me that the ETs are, for the most part, laissez-faire about it. They're only doing it a little bit. And in fact, one couple I talked to asked the ETs about this, and the ET said, we can only help people who are helping themselves, and we can help you out a little bit, but we can't give you the answers. The couple that they told this to had a profound contact experience in Sedona, Arizona. And they ended up being alternative healers in Hawaii and are very well known in their community. So it's hard to say why ETs are contacting people. And I think the reason they're not healing everyone, because can you imagine the consequences? It would be devastating if suddenly our military was given healing technology. You know what they would do with it. I don't think I even need to tell you. They would take it and heal the soldiers who come back out of the battlefields all torn up. I don't care if your legs have been blown off or what's happened to you. They'll stitch you right up and send you right back out. It would be devastating. We would probably have overpopulation problems. These are things that, are probably some of the reasons that there's not open official contact as well. also because of our own prejudice against people who are different. So if we're prejudiced against someone because of their religion or the color of their skin, imagine how we would feel about ETs. And we know what happens when an advanced culture encounters one that's less advanced. The less advanced culture gets absorbed. This has happened throughout human history, and maybe another reason why ETs have not had open official contact. But it's my assessment and my conclusion that there is healing taking place, that some ETs are very friendly indeed. Some ETs look just like us, which I think raises serious questions about human origins for that matter. And they're wiser than to go and cure everybody at once and hand us this stuff. We need to find the answers for ourselves. And so I think they're wise about that. I think open official contact is inevitable and could be coming sooner than we think, and is obviously one of the most volatile areas of UFO research. That and the government cover-up, which is a disaster and is ending. They're leaking like a sieve, and I expect that to be through in our lifetimes. I want to see that Roswell craft in a museum. So that's what I'm hoping for, and that's one of the reasons I'm up here tonight. And I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.